Hello everyone and welcome to this MIA webinar on legal research using AustLII. My name is Kirsten Cameron and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Welcome, it's wonderful to have your company. Today's webinar is presented by Philip Chung, the Executive Director at AustLII. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Philip to start the webinar. Over to you, Philip.
Thanks, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. This is Philip Chung. It's very exciting for me to be here today to present. For me, it's actually the first time using this particular webinar software. So if there's any technical glitches, please let me know, and we will make sure it works for everyone here. The way I like to present today's presentation is that while we are sort of dealing with this virtually, I still like to make it as interactive as we can. So please feel free to type questions as you go, but I will be leaving about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions or discussion based on the conversation we're having today. Given, I've asked Christian before we start what the mix of the people that's participating in these. I know some of you are lawyers, some of you may not be strict, in legal practice. So my assumption is many of you would have used AustLII, some may not have. And some that have used AustLII may have used what we now call the classic website, and I'm talking about the AustLII 20.0 interface as well. So hopefully, out of today's presentation, everyone will have will get something out of it. Okay, so please feel free to send questions through, and we'll try to deal with them either during the presentation, or I might make a note and come back to it at the end of the session. So hope that's okay with everyone. Now, there should be a set of handouts that have sent through as part of today's seminar that gives an overall structure of what I'll be talking about. Because we'll be using, in a way, both the slides and the web, and you have the slides in front of you, what I might do as we go further into the presentation may refer you to the slides rather than showing them on screen and focus on using the website. So hopefully people will be able to follow along, and the slides gives the framework with which we can talk about how to use AustLII for legal research, which is the focus of today. I will try to have a migration focus, but that's not my practice area, so I would be fairly generic in a way as well. Please feel free if you have particular search areas that you like to discuss, and we can talk about that in the latter part of the presentation there. So hopefully everyone's so clear about the structure. So let me start then on, if you refer to slide 3, which is about conceptualizing legal research, which is where I would like to start, so that we all know the context with which I'm presenting AustLII. Now, for those that are familiar with this, just bear with me while I talk through some of these. When we talk about legal research, the way that we tend to be discussing is to find legal resources. And they tend to be divided into two main types of materials: primary sources and secondary legal materials. Primary sources are the ones that define what the law is. So in the case of Australia, and for the purpose of this seminar, what we're interested in is case law and legislation. I know Christian was suggesting there's a focus on case law, so we'll have a look at that. But generally, when we're doing legal research, and when it comes to primary legal materials, those are the two types that we're interested in. Now, a lot of the time, especially I feel for people sort of working in this area, you are trying to either explain it to your clients or trying to explain to other people, in which case we tend to also refer to secondary legal sources, which are like commentaries, law journals, law reform, dictionaries, plain language materials. I'll go into some of those different types as we look into what AustLII provides, but that's just the major distinction there. Probably in the context of the work that you do, it's probably less important in terms of the third subcategory about international agreements and treaties. But that's a form of legal information that might have impact if you're talking more about human rights at that high meta level. So that might still be relevant depending on your area of practice or interest there. So the first thing to keep in mind when you're doing legal research is what is it that you're looking for. Okay, that's the types of materials. Primary, secondary, and within each of the categories, cases, legislation, or secondary sources. So that's important to know because that would help your focus, okay? Whereas you develop or finesse, if you like, your research skills. Now, having said that, when you come to a general site like AustLII, another legal website, you don't have to sort of start focusing on that straight away, but you need to be mindful the types of resources that you're looking for, and that would help you navigate, and I hope in a way limit the scope of the materials you're looking for, because you tend to get a lot back rather than not enough. So that's one way of limiting scope. The other question that's likely to come up when doing legal research is the notion of jurisdiction. In Australia, being a federation, we've got two levels of governments that we need to be mindful of. One is the federal jurisdiction, which is basically the Commonwealth. And in the case of migration law, that's pretty much, I think, where the focus would be. But then you might touch upon some of the state and territory legislation or cases as well. So again, being mindful about jurisdiction is helpful because that would help you guide your search in terms of your scope and where you would like to browse or look for information. Now, in terms of the actual, I suppose, execution of legal research, the key approaches that I've listed there are basically browsing and searching. Okay, so browsing, so that we get terminology that we all understand, is if I talk about browsing, what I'm saying is that you follow hypertext links. You navigate a website in particular, especially if it's new to you, browsing will be very helpful, so you understand the scope of the materials that you can find. So in other words, if you go to a website that say, I'm only giving you information about, say, Federal Court of Australia cases, then if you know that that's a limitation, you wouldn't be expecting to find any state cases there. So it's very important that you understand the scope of what's available in a particular system that you use. Okay, and I can't stress this enough because I've seen a lot of scenarios. People will come in and ask me saying, look, I've been looking for this particular type of materials, but I can't find it on this website. Why is that? Am I doing something wrong with my search, etc.? And then I said, well, what is it that you're looking for? So they might be looking at a legislation website, hoping to find case law. Something as simple as that would have saved them a lot of time if they appreciated the scope of the limitation of the particular system they are looking at. And of course, the now very popular approach of doing research is just purely searching, okay? Especially given Google and other general search engines. Most people will, when they see a website and they see a search box, start typing in keywords and things, okay? So what I'm hoping after today's session, if I can send a message as a starting point, is maybe for new website that you're not familiar with, slow down, browse around just to figure out the scope or what's available. Then you can look at the searchability aspect of a particular system, because then it would help you be aware of what's available and, more importantly, what's not available. I think that's a very important message to take away. Now, when it comes to searching, of course, you've got the standard approaches is typing in keywords, and that's something that's supported by most systems. The more sophisticated systems will also allow you to type search queries using connectors. And I'll talk a little bit more about search term generation and other tips, etc., as we go through today's seminar there. So hopefully this gives you a conceptual framework in terms of how we would like to discuss about legal research today. Before we look at specific system, let me give you some background to AustLII, in case some of you may not be aware of what AustLII is. AustLII stands for the Australasian Legal Information Institute. I assume you appreciate that we call it AustLII for short. It's a mouthful there. It was actually established back in 1995 as a research project from UTS and UNSW faculties of law. Okay, by two academics, Professor Andrew Mowbray from UTS and Professor Graham Greenlee from UNSW. The purpose was to create a facility whereby we can advocate for or facilitate free access to legal information. Now, just to give a bit of a 1-minute history, if you like, why this was created. Back in 1995, there was no free access to legal information. And for those that were working in practice at the time, I think you may not remember, it cost a few $100s per connect hour. Okay, so you could imagine how expensive it was to do any of these sort of electronic-based research. While we now take for granted systems like AustLII and others, only about 20-odd years ago, that was not the case. So there's a lot of sort of history and background in terms of why AustLII was started and why its mandate is to facilitate and make available legal information to the general public. And because of that objective, over the last 20-plus years, it has built up quite a substantive collection of legal information. Even though it started off with cases and legislation, there are now over 790 databases of primary sources, cases, legislation, but a lot of journals, law reform, treaties, and international agreements as well. So in a minute, I'll be switching over to show you what the website contains, but that's the basis with which AustLII was developed, and that's why you have so much information there. And I suppose part of the challenge for people navigating the AustLII system is to know what's available there, how to conduct searches within the context of the large collection. You're talking about quite a lot of documents there, over a million individual searchable items that you find on AustLII. The last point I just want to make there about AustLII being a founding member of the free access to law movement is to say AustLII is not alone in this, of course, and especially in the common law world, the notion of free access being so fundamental to access to justice that we have about 60 institutional members worldwide. So pretty much all, many, if not all, of the common law countries have an equivalent or similar to what we do here in Australia. So the skills that you are looking at and using that we're talking about today, I hope will be transferable to other jurisdictions if you move between different common law jurisdictions in particular. So they're very useful in that context. So hopefully that gives you a background to how AustLII works and what we do. Okay. Now, the next slide is about browsing AustLII, and I'm talking about case law example here. But before I do that, I'll just switch over to the AustLII website, and I want to take you through, at a higher level, what I would like you to do when you're actually coming to a new website. So for those of you that use AustLII frequently, just bear with me when I'll in terms of running through what's available. You never know, you may discover there are new databases that you're not aware of. So I assume everyone can see the AustLII website now. I think I just did a screen share, if that's okay. Just someone just say okay, so I want to...
That's all good, Philip.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. That's fine, no more case. All right. Now, as you can see for the screen here, this is the new AustLII interface. This is what we call AustLII 20.0. In your notes, I've given a background to that. If we have time, I'll come back to it. So for those of you that have used AustLII before, what I now refer to the classic AustLII, I can assure you all the features that were on the AustLII classic is available here. And as I go through the website, you see how that mapped across between the classic and the current interface. For those that haven't seen AustLII before, that's fine. You just accept this as is. And one thing I would say is that I'm not sure if anyone is coming through today using their mobile phone. If they are, then the new AustLII website is much more responsive to your mobile device. So it will look very different if you access it through your mobile phone, and this is one of the reasons why we've updated to this interface there. Okay. Now, in terms of trying to map through the conceptual model that I was describing earlier to the AustLII system, and why I thought it's useful to mention that as we go. If you recall, what I said, there were two elements in terms of how we would look at legal research. One was by type of materials, whether it's case primary, like cases, legislation, or secondary, like journals, law reform, etc. And the second way that we tend to divide or classify information, and we can navigate that on the AustLII system, is by jurisdiction. So if you keep those two concepts in mind, you would be able to see that the ribbons, which I call the red and the black ribbon there, mirrors the way I've described it. So the red ribbon provides a mechanism for you to browse by type, so you can see primary sources, secondary sources, law reform treaties, and I'll come to some of the other materials that you see on the red ribbon later. The black ribbon allow us to look at the materials by jurisdiction. So in other words, if I'm interested in particular jurisdiction like Commonwealth, New South Wales, ACT, Queensland, etc., you can do that way as well. All right, so that's at a high level, this is something that you can look at in terms of browsing and trying to figure out what's available on AustLII. Because I mentioned there are over 792 databases, one way to just have a quick snapshot of what's on AustLII is to just click on all databases. And you can see, if I scroll through very quickly, different materials that's available there. Okay, so list and list of materials. And this is something that you would have to do when you were doing the classic interface. Using the new interface, and especially if you're coming through mobile devices, it's much more touch-friendly. You can see that there are a lot more like buttons rather than links, even though in effect they are links. So at this level, I'm looking at all materials. I can focus on just New South Wales by just clicking on that, and you will see that the system actually just readjusts itself and filters only to the New South Wales materials. So similarly, if I'm interested in journals, I can click on that, and again, I'm looking at the journals selection there. Okay, so I hope that that provides, for those that have used the AustLII Classic before, a much more convenient way for you to be navigating through what is getting to be fairly long list of databases that's available there. And given what AustLII is trying to do is that we are trying to be comprehensive in every sense of the word. So you will see a lot of historical materials going on to the AustLII system. Just for information, the first case or the first document now on the AustLII website goes back to 1788. Okay, so there's still gaps. We're not saying it's complete by any stretch of the imagination, but we are very good in terms of comprehensiveness from a historical perspective. And of course, we try to be comprehensive as well in terms of the scope. So we're trying to have as much material as we can collect under the framework of what we call legal information, be it primary, secondary, and others. So over time, what's defined as others, it's sort of growing, and as we will look at the slides in a minute, you see that there are a lot of very interesting content there. Before I go to individual databases, let me just come back to the front page, and the way to do that is simply click on the AustLII logo. So anytime when you're navigating through, or when you find yourself after search somewhere on the AustLII system and you want to come back to the front page, just click on the AustLII logo and it will tend to get you back to the front page here. So what I was wanting to highlight is that on the front page you would notice that we provide news and any updates. So that would be something to check if you want to monitor what's happening on AustLII. So for example, last week we just launched the Employment Labor Law Library, which is a massive collection of industrial materials there. Maybe if there's interest, we should be looking at some sort of migration law library. So if we can find resources or funding to build that, I guess in a way let us know for those that are interested in working on that particular aspect. Okay, now let me then show you and have a closer look at some of the databases. So I'll do two examples. One is looking at a case law database, and one looking at a legislation database, and look at how we can conduct research just purely by browsing alone. So in the case of the High Court, I could have gone through the all databases listing, and then that will give me a list of all collections that we have. But I also want to show you how we would navigate this by jurisdiction as well. So if I click on the Commonwealth, CTH, you can see now the database page, the collection page we're looking at only focuses on Commonwealth materials. And you can see the categories: Commonwealth case law, Commonwealth legislation, other Commonwealth materials, and just the large collection of tax law, we've done as a separate grouping for the ATO rulings there. Okay, and similarly, you are able to navigate or filter out results. Say, if you're interested in the Commonwealth legislation or other materials from the Commonwealth or ATO rulings by just filtering in the buttons at the top. Let's go back to Commonwealth case law, and I just want to show you the High Court of Australia database. Now, this would it will be the same for all the case law databases that you might be interested in. So we can have a look at the High Court. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind, especially for those that have used the classic interface previously. For those that use the classic interface, you will notice here it immediately gets the most recent tab as when you land on database homepage, rather than alphabetical listing and by year. They are all there, and I'll show you where they are in a sec. But from our own sort of research, in terms of people, the way that people use the AustLII website, a lot of the time people are interested to know what's happening at the High Court level, and for that matter, what's happening at a particular court level. So we thought rather than having to click on an extra link, this is the quickest way that people can find out the information that they need. Now, a couple of things to be mindful of when you're navigating databases on AustLII is to have a look at the database statistics section here. A couple of things to note. It will tell you when it was last updated. So in the case of the High Court, it's regularly updated daily, and probably more regularly than daily. So what this is telling us is updated today. The most recent case that we have from the High Court dated the 8th of November. The number of documents, the number of cases we hold, over 7,500, and also gives you an idea about the number of accesses it has in the last 12 months. So here it's over 3 million. Okay, so you can, just looking at the stats alone, you can say, look, this is a database that's frequently updated, it's really well accessed. Not surprisingly, given that it is the High Court of Australia. And in a minute, we'll look at some of the other courts that are probably more relevant to the area of your practice. A couple of things that you may want to look at is, before we leave the homepage, this tells you the most recent. You can also have a look at most cited. So in other words, which High Court cases have been cited most from around the world. Okay? And if you look at these, for those that have some understanding of some of the legal context, you can see why some of them are still there. Now, what's interesting though, and why I wanted to show you this, a lot of the cases that most cited deals with immigration, as you can see. The first few are all from the Minister for Immigration, etc. Okay? And one of the reasons for this is that I think for a lot of the immigration cases, there are a lot of standard High Court cases that are being referred to when they discuss this, and so this is why they get cited the most. There's a lot of templated, if you like, references that people would refer to. But if you scroll down, you can see other High Court cases that are very highly cited as well. So if you're looking at a particular database, and we'll have a look at some of the other ones in, say, the Migration Review Tribunal and some of the others, which might be more relevant at that tribunal level, and you can have a look at that. And that's one way of looking for information without typing in the search. So if you're interested in the most recent, most cited, and the third tab that you have here is what we call most accessed. Okay, so in other words, how popular is it by the users? How frequently they've been downloaded. And one of the most popular ones, since I guess when we have started collecting download statistics, not surprisingly, is about Marble and Queensland. This is the native title case. And you can see a whole list of other very popular cases as well. So the most cited are not necessarily the most accessed, and vice versa. But sometimes you get to databases where they're most cited as well as most accessed. So again, that's another way or another tool, if you like, that you can use to research on a particular jurisdiction, in this case, the High Court. Okay, so hopefully people can appreciate that just on the front page alone, you have a lot of interesting new features which we weren't able to provide in the classic interface. If you haven't tried those 3 tabs, when you have a moment, try most recent, most cited, most accessed. The other thing that we've introduced as part of the new website, and in particular for those that are interested in monitoring or keeping track of the changes from a particular court, we have now created what we call database feed that you can subscribe to. I hope everyone's familiar with RSS, and if not, let me know, and then I can explain a little bit further. But if you are aware of that, you can subscribe by clicking on that, and that becomes a feed into your RSS reader, and then you can monitor the changes to the High Court as daily, as when we get the new changes through from them. So that's another way for you to keep on top of, if you like, of important court decisions that apply to you, okay, or to a tribunal for that matter. So there's something to look at for your area. Now, as I said, for those that were familiar with the classic AustLII, all the other navigation are still there. If you're interested in navigating by year, you can click on the Any button, and then it expands out to the years that are relevant. So if you're interested in 95, I can click on that, and now it actually filters through to 1995. You can focus on particular months. So you can say November 1995. Okay, so that's one way of navigating through to the year listing, if you like. You can click on the red ribbon here to come back to the front page of the High Court database. We can now click on Start with any letter, so we can click on that, and we can find anything starting with an S. Okay, so as you can see, the table of contents navigation are still all there. They are just being organized in a different way. Hopefully that's clear. So let's have a look at a High Court of Australia database, and then I can highlight some of the features that you can use when you're looking at a particular document. So on AustLII, most of the content, I think probably 95 plus of the content on AustLII is what we call full text. In other words, you get a full document. You don't only just get an abstract or metadata. There are some specialized databases where the only information we have is metadata, but they're very rare, and we try not to provide them if we can have the option of full text. So what I've done is just clicked on the most recent documents from the High Court, and as you can see here, it's slightly differently laid out for those that are used to the classic side. Okay, a lot of the navigational elements are on your right-hand side. Previously, it was at the top bar here. Again, all the features that you are familiar with are all available, but just positioned in a slightly different way. Now, a couple of features that I'd like to draw your attention to when you're looking at a case law database as such. A lot of the times, my assumption is people are doing research online, but sometimes you may want to download a copy to read offline. Okay, so if you were interested in doing that, by all means, you can just keep the HTML version, the web page that you're seeing here. But there are a couple of options that you can use to download the document. The RTF file format, basically the Word document that we receive from the court, has been available since the beginning, and that's a popular format with which people actually save a copy and read offline. And that's one way that people can actually refer to the materials and work with the content, or if they want to annotate electronically. Recently, we've introduced a format called Signed by AustLII. So the next link there is Signed PDA. I should actually just click on the RTF just to show you how that works. So you can see if you click on that, and if you click on to open it up in Word, you would see the Word document as is that we received from the court. Okay, so this is what we received from the court. The other option is the signed PDF version, and this is the version that we are now we've put in place a couple of years ago as part of a research project. What we've done there is to say, imagine if we can look at how legal publishing should be, especially when it comes to case law. How do we make it more useful from a digital environment? So what we've done is invest quite a lot of money to create the infrastructure that you see here as a PDF document. I must have selected a long document. It's taking a while to generate. It's doing this dynamically, and what you get out of that is what we call a digitally signed version of a PDF file. Some reason we're not getting through today. Maybe there's some network issue. But as I said, if you haven't seen this, have a look at it. Oh, it's coming back. It's taking a while because it's generated dynamically. I'll make it a little bit bigger so that you can see some of the visual features. So on the top left-hand corner, you see that it has an imprint that says signed by AustLII. It has the logo, the watermark that's been inserted again dynamically throughout the document. And on the bottom left-hand corner, it will tell you the date and time to the microsecond when it was downloaded from the AustLII website. Okay. On the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, has a link that says Verify Version. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is that as more courts go through a e-court process, I would envisage that many more courts will be interested in accepting just a URL, which is what that verified version takes you to, and always gives you the most recent version of the document. So the way that I envisage this might be used is that you'll be downloading copies, either the RTF or the HTML version for you to work on, and maybe this is the version that you submit when you go to trial, if you go to trial, or as a way of documenting what it is that you've been using. Okay, because of the timestamping feature and because of the digital signature, is actually very secure in terms of any potential tampering with the document. Not that we're expecting there will be any tampering, but that's just a more giving a comfort that it's extremely difficult if anyone wanted to change the contents here. Okay, so if you haven't seen the signed by AustLII version, this is what we're referring to in that instance. Now, some courts and tribunals have actually taken this to the next level, and I might come back to that. If I lost my connection, sorry. Let me.
Philip, if you click on the slides, perhaps first.
Okay.
Yeah. And do you want to go back to screen sharing again now?
Yeah, I just need to create a new browser. It's okay. I'll just bring it back.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's fine. Yeah. I think I closed the browser. That way. Everyone can see the screen again? Yep. Okay. So what I was saying was that some of the courts and tribunals have taken the next step, and they've actually formally passed practice directions or notes, etc., to say this is a version that they would accept as part of the submission process. Okay? And the way to identify that is, I'll give you another example. This is from the Federal Circuit Court. If you have a look at the Federal Circuit Court and look at their signed PDA version, you would see that they've actually added, when it comes up, another link. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see. You can see that they've, on the top right-hand corner, we have inserted a link that says accepted by the court because it has done it formally. There is a practice direction which you can, as a basis for that. All right, so we're hoping that more and more courts would be more open to the notion of accepting this electronic version as a way of submitting the documents to the court. Now, I should flag, for those that are either, a self-representation or in a smaller jurisdictions, most of the courts are not that pedantic about the types of document that you hand up. But what we're interested in is to make available a version that's really good and is free, that would be useful from a court's perspective. Because if you think about it, what the courts are trying to do is when they get a lot, especially those jurisdictions where they get a lot of cases, where they get a lot of documents being submitted, that if they say on the face of it, the document is actually bona fides, that they are happy to accept, that would help with their work as well. So this is the reason why I'm raising it, in case you work in particular jurisdictions that have the accepted by the court link, which even makes it better for electronic submission, etc. Okay, so again, if you haven't looked at it, have a go at using the sign by AustLII and let us know any feedback about that particular usage. I'll come back to the High Court, most recent. A couple of the other links that are available on the document level page, if you like, the printing. So while we talk about electronic, and I've sort of given you ways that you can work with things online, a lot of people are still very comfortable with a printed version. Okay, you can of course print out the version using the RTF or the PDF, but a lot of the time people are interested in just printing from what they see on the screen. So as part of the restructure or redevelopment of the AustLII website, we've actually introduced two print versions. One's what we call Print Pretty, for those that really like spaced out versions of the document. As you can see, it looks like a printed document in that sense, with the fully aligned and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of white spacing. Okay. If you're just only interested in the print copy because you like to work with it, but not necessarily for the look, you can look at the Print Eco-Friendly. It's just more compressed. So for long documents, it actually saves about 20% of paper. So unless you want to, I would suggest use Print Eco-Friendly if you just want to have a printout of what you need to refer to. Now, a couple of the other features that are common across all case law database, and this is still part of the browsing aspect of doing research, is under the Cite By option. You see law site records and note-up references. Okay, so those two are actually very useful research tools, and in fact, I've sort of mentioned that in your slides under search strategies. So we might come back to them in a minute. And the other features that we've introduced in the new website is basically join the conversation. Now, I think in law in particular, maybe, I don't know about migration generally, but what I've noticed in law, there's a lot of people now treating pages, they're discussing, they're participating about what's happening in the legal sea using Twitter as a mechanism on the social media. So rather than having you to type in the details and so on, a click of that, if I'm logged into a Twitter account, that would already provide the necessary detail for that, and that's a way that we feel might be useful to engage with potential user groups in your area. So this is just making it more useful to you as users of the system. I'll come back to the searching aspect, but you notice now, as opposed to the earlier interface, that each page now has a search box. Okay, so you can initiate your search at any point during the browse process. But I'll come back to the searching later. So this basically covers the features when you get to the document and what you can do by browsing, and except for the two elements there, which I'll come back to. Okay, and I'll demonstrate those two when I'll show you in a sec. When I look at, I'll pick one of those most cited, so you have an idea about how that works. Okay, so if I go to Chen Yi-Kim and Minister for Immigration and Ethnic Affairs back in 1989, if I was looking at this case, a couple of things you will notice. And you'll notice that across the AustLII databases as well. You'd see there are hypertext links that's been added by the system to the Migration Act, which we'll be looking at next, as well as other acts and legislation, other cases that is referred to that document. So one of the very interesting features of the AustLII database and many other legal databases is the interconnection. Law, if you like, is essentially common law. It's about precedents. It's about references to other materials. So there's a lot of interconnectedness in the documents themselves. And a system like AustLII actually brings all that together for you. So this is what we call, when we're doing legal research, as opposed to the more traditional printed way of doing research, where we rely on books, that is sort of static, and the way you do it is very linear. When you're doing research online and using systems like AustLII, where the interconnections are made explicit, we tend to modify the way we do research, and that's what we call associative research. As in, you get to a point where you say, look, I'm now interested in this particular area, then you start exploring that area, rather than doing it linearly. So you may find, as the more you work with online system, the way you conduct research may change slightly, as opposed to a more traditional print version of conducting them. Now, as I said, the reason why I want to go to this document is so to demonstrate a couple of things. Okay, each case and legislation section have the cite by subsection here. Now, the law cite record basically is a mechanism whereby we can find out how this particular decision has been cited subsequently. And the law cite record, I guess if for those that are interested, if you want to skip ahead, on page 6 of your notes, there is a slide about the law cite citator. Okay, so I'll come back to that, but for the time being, if I just click on it, it will show for you a listing. There are 33,000 references to this document. It's the most cited high court case in the database. Okay, and you can see most recently cited on the 24th of October. Very recent. Okay, so FCA, Federal Court, all over the Commonwealth sort of database, but you can also see cited in New Zealand, etc. Okay, so this is one way of actually doing a lot of research when you are just browsing. And I'll come back to this when we talk about search strategy, if we have time, but just so that you be mindful of this, if you found or if you're aware of a popular case or key case in this area, in the area you're practicing in, then law cites, as a way of finding relevant materials, which is really about what legal research is all about, is one of the best starting points that you can give yourself. Okay, so you can see, as I shown before, where they've been subsequently cited when, and just based on a case, I can then now explore many other cases that might be useful to what I'm researching on. Okay, now similarly, and it works slightly differently, the NOTAP reference. Again, I've given you more information on page 6 about what NOTAP refers to. If I click on that, basically it does a search. So again, it's what we call an embedded search. So at the moment, I've not typed anything. I've just clicked on the link. It does a search across all of the AustLII materials. Okay, so if you're interested in focusing on the AustLII materials and only interested in the materials that's available through the AustLII site as opposed to more international, then NOTAP might be a good starting point with your research. But generally, I would say use both. Okay, so both law cite and NOTAP for case law. And as you can see here, we can find other cases that refers to it. I'll come back to some of these when we are looking at searching. So this is basically the system conducting a search for you. You can see find references from the Refugee Tribunal, so that you can see it actually does refer to it. You can see it's referring to Chen there. Okay, so the law cite and NOTAP are two very useful tools when you come to browsing as you embark on your research task, and especially helpful if you know a particular key case in an area of law that you're interested in. So that's a very good way of navigating. Now, so that's an example of browsing and doing research at the same time. Okay, so browsing doesn't just mean I'm looking at the document. Browsing can say I'm navigating, but I'm using some of the embedded features that's provided by the system. So hopefully you can appreciate some of the strategies in terms of doing that. So this is a case law example. I might now want to move to a legislation example. Now, given the context of this audience, let me have a look at the Migration Act. Okay, so in this case, I can go straight to the Migration Act because of the hypertext link. Now, if you just want to come through from the front page, let me show you how to do that. So you can start from the AustLII front page, and because I know the Migration Act is a Commonwealth database, I can go to Commonwealth. I'll go Commonwealth Legislation, Consolidated Acts, and as we get to the Consolidated Acts database, you can see here, rather than the most recent, it gives you the most access. All right, and not surprisingly, Migration Act is one of the more popular accessed acts around. In fact, close to 1 million accesses to that document. Some of you may see that hover when the details when hover over that link. Now again, let me just remind you, when you're using, especially if you're trying to search for materials that have a significance based on time, as in when a version of a piece of legislation you might be interested in, you need to check the database just to make sure there might not be gaps. So this one was built yesterday, so that potentially there's still 1 day. You know, if there's something changed between our build from the 12th to today, then it's not reflected in this database. So you need to be mindful about the limitation. So this is important. Okay, so when it comes to legislation in particular, because they might be legislative changes. Okay, 1 day the risk might be low, but if there were longer periods, then you may need to look at other sources if you're really relying on it. This is fine just for your working version, so if you're doing research, this is probably okay. But if you are relying on it for submission and so on, it might be useful to go and check the government website, okay, because we source information from the government website directly. All right. So let's look at Migration Act. When you get to the Act itself, you will realize that it's not just one long document. I'll show you how you can get the full document, but you only get the table of content. Okay, so on the AustLII system, since the beginning, we've always been dividing a piece of legislation into individual sections. That's for, I guess, sort of usefulness, as well as the searchability aspect. Okay, so when you search for legislation, AustLII, you can probably get to the section rather than just getting to the act, which makes it much more useful, I think. Okay, now before we look at the individual section, there's a couple of things I should draw your attention to on the right-hand side. In addition to some of the information you already know from case law, one thing that to me is very helpful when it comes to legislation is to look at the notes. Remember, I was saying that you want to know what changes this incorporate, especially when you talk about consolidated acts. Now, given that I won't ask people to say okay or not, but I hope people understand the distinction between consolidated and numbered. Okay, so if you're not clear on that, let me just give you a minute, so very quickly, the difference. When we're talking about generally, when you're searching for legislation, you tend to be working with consolidated acts because it consolidates all the changes from different acts into the primary act. So in your case, most of the time you'll be looking at this particular act through the consolidated version. But sometimes if you're seeing these and you say, look, there are some changes coming through, but may not actually be in effect yet, then the database that you may want to look for is under the numbered acts database. Okay, so this numbered acts database is the database that shows you the acts as they are passed through Parliament. Okay, so if there are acts that amend other acts, you find it under the numbered acts database. So please make sure you understand that distinction. I won't spend too much time on it. If it's a question that you'd like to be explained further, maybe you can just flag that and we can bring that up during the Q&A at the end. Okay, but I'd like to make sure you understand that because it's very important when you're dealing with legislation. Even, as well when you're doing case law searches and so on, you need to understand the context with which you're working with. And similarly, when you're working with regulation, you have that distinction between common, consolidated, and numbered as well. Okay, and as you can see with the listing here, you have the different types of collection you can look at, and we even have repealed acts. So if you're looking for acts that are no longer current, but you never know because your matter may predate the repeal, so you may want access to the repealed acts database as well. Or if you're trying to compare or argue between the changes, the versions that you're interested in, you may also want to look at the Repeal X databases there. But just be mindful when you're actually looking at it, the database you're working in. Okay, because otherwise you might end up and you think you're working with the most current version, but you may be looking at an earlier version. So it's very important at the beginning to understand this. So this is why I'm spending a lot of time explaining the browsing aspect, because until you're aware of what it is you're looking at, your research to me would not be as good as it could be. Okay, so hopefully people appreciate that. Again, if you need more information, I'm happy to discuss those distinctions further. So let me come back to the Migration Act and have a look at what we can do with this particular act. So, one area that you might be interested in before we start navigating to individual sections is to have a look at the notes. Okay, so under Navigate, there's a whole section that talks about the notes. Now, the reason why I want you to go to this particular section first, especially if it's only the first time you use AustLII, is that we knew that the database was updated on the 12th, okay, which is indicated at on the front page of the database of the Commonwealth Consolidated Acts database. But we actually don't know the version of the Migration Act that we're talking about. Okay, under the notes section, this gives us a lot more information about what it is. Okay, and I'm drawing your attention to this simply because if you happen to be working on a matter that may be affected by a upcoming amendment, then it's something to be mindful of. Okay, so if you look at these, you can see the compilation date. In other words, the consolidation of this particular version we're looking at was done on the 12th of August. Okay, so that tells you, okay, even though the database was updated, or the AustLII database was updated on the 12th of November, which is yesterday, but the version of the Act that we're looking at is actually in August. I hope people understand the distinction. Okay, so that means potentially there might be 3 months of amendments that have not been included in this compilation. Okay, so hopefully everyone understands the distinction there. Now, it tells you, the other thing it tells you, which is very helpful, is that it includes all the amendments up to Act numbers 67 in 2018. Now, the numbers referring to here is actually the numbered Act. So remember I mentioned the number Act database, that's where that comes from. Okay, it's the year and number. So if we go to the numbered Act database, we would then be able to find Act number 67 of 2018. So if you wanted to, you can have a look at that. Now, I assume most of you are aware in the Commonwealth jurisdiction, you also have the requirement to register all legislative instruments, which includes acts. This is when it was registered. So you have a number of what we call metadata that's useful to be aware of. So hopefully that gives you an idea when you're using materials on AustLII legislation. You know the currency, at least to the version that you're aware of. And then if you need to do further investigation between the 3 months, you can do that. All right? So now, I'm sure of you are aware the Migration Act is very long, and it's so long that the system has, the government actually has split it into 2 volumes, okay? Volume 1 and Volume 2. Okay, on the website that you're looking at, we've combined them. So you're actually looking at the whole Act here. But when you go to the download, as you would see previously, it's actually based on 2 volumes there. Anyway, there's a lot more information you can look at. But the other bits I just want to show you briefly, the table of amendments. That's a legislative history. So I'm using Control F. To take us down quickly through the different sections. Now, if you go to legislation history, it will tell you what has amended this Act, okay, and what are the changes that are coming through. Okay, so look, if you look at this is the legislation history of the Migration Act. It's started in 1958, and subsequently this has been amended by all these. Okay, I won't dwell on it, but if you needed to find, if you want to do legal research on the historical context of migration law, this table will be relevant, especially if you're talking about between dates. Okay, whether some amendment may affect your scenarios or not. Okay, I won't dwell on it, but you can actually see all the changes there, and might be helpful if you need to deal with the context of your matter. Now, the next table after that, the amendment history table, actually tells you which act has amended a particular section of the Migration Act. Now, Section 5, if you scan through it, has been amended the most. Look at this, the number of amendments there. You don't need to respond, but think about what Section 5 is before we look at it. Some of you may know why, perhaps have an idea why Section 5 has been amended the most. Anyone? Good, Victoria, very, very fast. Definitions. So the interpretation section, okay? So that's really, if you glance at it, you can see why some sections are amended more. Now, if you're working with migration law and you say, I wonder what sections are, are contentious, or what the focus of the government policy have been or will or are, these would be a good table to consider. Okay, you can have a look at that. I hope everyone sort of see the utility of those two tables. I think it's very actually helpful when you're doing this sort of research. Okay. As I think Victoria mentioned, the reason why that's the case, Section 5, it's all the definitions. And you can see, as I said, from here, the hypertext links I would take you if you wanted to look at the ACO Act and the reference that that brings. Okay. The AustLII system actually adds about 40 million hypertext links automatically in the database. Okay, so it's what we call really rich and dense hypertext system, and that makes it so useful for doing legal research because everything is interconnected in one way or another. Now, the example I've given you under browsing for legislation was Section 134 of the Migration Act. So for a table of contents that's very long like this, I mean, we can keep scrolling. As I said, you can also use the Control F to jump straight to, 134 of the legislation. So Section 134, for those that understand this, would deal with cancellation of business visa. Just one that I happen to pick on. So if you look at it, we now are browsing at the level of a section. Okay. So in addition to everything else we see from the front page, which is basically the table of contents, you will now see that you can now do next and previous, so you can move to the next section or go to the previous section. Okay. So next section, Section 135, and then you can go previous 134. So you don't have to go back to the table of contents all the time if you're just navigating sequentially. Now, remember, I was just telling you before, in the case law example, how useful the NOTAP mechanism is. And in the case of legislation, NOTAP is also a tool that's available for you to use as well. Okay? So in this case, if I'm browsing Section 134, which talks about cancellation of business visas, and as you can see, gives you at that level, say, well, okay, all right, this tells me Section 134. Are there any materials, are there any cases that's been written about this? Now, how do we go through and find more information that explains Section 134? When we talk about searching in a sec, you can, of course, conduct a search, and we can do searching and do that. But even without doing a search at this stage, and if you just want to get a high level about some of the cases that might be relevant or some of the secondary sources that might be relevant for the work that you do, you can just click on NOTAP here. And immediately it comes back to you with 875 documents that refers to Section 134 of the Migration Act, one of which is the AAT. So I can click on that and click on Show Results. And as you can see here, it talks about Section 134 of the Migration Act. Okay, so for those that haven't used the AustLII system before, NOTAP has been one of the most to me, one of the most useful and popular features that we provide since the beginning. NoteUp has been around for a long time, and you can see why. Because with a click, it gives you a very good starting point for your research, especially if you get to the section level. These are all AAT. We can just skip to a couple pages. You see there are many other. Hopefully, there will be other jurisdictions that deals with that as well. While I'm jumping ahead a little bit, another way that we could do when we talk about searching is that if I want to know where else besides the AAT, the section 134 of the Migration Act being referred to, I can actually click on the by database. Okay? And not surprisingly, given 300 plus documents are from the AAT, they overwhelm what we're seeing there. But there are documents from the Federal Court, Full Court, Federal Circuit, etc. Okay, and there are also journal articles that refer to this as well, which is sometimes you might find that useful when you're trying to explain to your client, or maybe just to do more research about this particular area. Or just have a look at Sydney Law Review. Ooh, not showing the. There seems to be something weird with the link there. Might be a glitch there. Maybe let me try the Federal Court, see if that's better. Yeah, the Federal Court showing there, so we can have a look at the Federal Court. And then you can see, oh, here it's not quite what we thought, section 134.202, in the case that that's the case. So here you can see when the automated hypertext linking may have failed. Okay, so you see S134, and somewhere he would refer to the Migration Act. So again, this is why I emphasize that NoteUp has been done heuristically. Sorry, I was just noticing there were a few questions about section 134 NoteUp. I think just to answer Colin's question, the NoteUp on subsection, no, you can't do it at that level. We might be able to do it at a search level. Okay, so what we're doing here is only noting up to the section level. So we're only noting up the document we're looking at. So in this case, it's section 134, which is what we're looking at. So we don't differentiate between section 134 subsection 1 or section 134 subsection 2. If you want to do that, you may have to construct a search. All right, so we'll come back to maybe looking at some of these when we actually do searching. Now, alternatively, the way you do it is that because you're already at the level of doing section 134 as a NoteUp, you could potentially add another search to it. So instead of saying you're already looking at that, and then you may want to add N section, put an N or near. I'll come back to the search later. Okay, when we're looking at these. I think Maria has a question about the regulation. So maybe now, provided the subclass, I don't know the subclass 820 of the migration regulation. You can then see if that was the case, whether it is, as I said, an individual section of the migration. But if it's just a whole list, then like as I explained to Colin, you only be able to search at a higher level, and then what you have to do is add subclass 820 in your search. Okay, so we'll come back to using both NoteUp and the search combination next when we've done a little bit more about searching. Everyone happy with the NoteUp so far? I think that you can, I see just based on the comments, the questions being asked, you can see how you can use a lot of the NoteUp in some of the initial research. Okay, now, before I move on to searching, which I think where this conversation is leading us, there's a couple of databases that I've listed on in your notes on page 3, basically slide 6, I guess, about browsing. Some of you may already be familiar with it, which is fine. Others, if you're not, just be mindful, and you see them when we're doing searching. Now, if I've listed there the Migration Review Tribunal, the Refugee Tribunal, all of them are relevant still, in the sense that some of the case law might be relevant, but both of them, both two tribunals have now been merged with the AAT from 2015 onwards. So when we come to searching in a minute, then you need to be mindful that some of the changes are have been done. And when you're doing searches in the scope, when we talk about that, you may need to be mindful of that. So if I go to the AAT very quickly, you can see that here, one of the most recent documents from the AAT is from yesterday, is to do with migration. All right? And this is why when you, if you're doing research on case law in particular, those three databases would be probably what you might want to select, at least over that period. I think there was an immigration review tribunal before 99 as well, if you want to go back further, and which we have on the AustLII system also. Okay? You will know, I should flag, you will notice that under the AAT, because it does, many jurisdictions, many lists, and it's combining a number of tribunals. What we suggested to them is that rather than just putting everything under AAT to give people a chance of figuring out which jurisdiction, sub-jurisdiction they're interested in, they've now added in parentheses if it's a specialized division. So in the case of migration, they've indicated that. So hopefully that would be something that's useful to you when we're doing searches in this way. Okay, we'll come back to these in a sec. Now, maybe I'll give a minute for anyone to ask about browsing, not the searching aspect. Is there anything you want me to expand on at this stage? If not, I'd like to move on to searching. Okay? If there are any questions, we can raise these at the Q&A session at the end. Now, if you flip to your notes on page 4, which is basically slide 8 on searching, maybe I should just flash that up. So there are three main ways of doing searching that you would see in your notes. Keyword searching, which is so very common. You just think of keywords and just type them in, okay, with the space. You can say, you know, business visa, study visa, student, etc. Okay, so you just type in keywords there. Now, most systems, including AustLII, support what we call phrase searching. So in other words, if you want to say, is this person fit and proper to be considered as part of the test for immigration, then you put that as a phrase. Now, I assume most people are comfortable with those searches. The one that I just want to talk on very briefly is the search queries with connectors. In other words, if you want to control a bit more of what you can do with the system, you need to have some understanding of connectors. The main categories of connectors I've listed there: Boolean, proximity, wildcard and truncation, what we call field and segment operators. Most of the time, if you're using connectors, you'll be using the first two. You'll be using so-called Boolean operators. Basically, you know them as and or not. Okay, the other type of operator, which I find very useful, especially when you talk about law in particular, because you want to be able to control the precision or the proximity with which the terms that you're using are related. So there we've got the near and then within operator. Now, I've listed them here just to prompt you to say they exist. There is a user guide you can download from the front page, and I think if not been sent to you, maybe it's sent to you. And I've also provided a list at the end of the document as well, in case you wanted a menu when you're using AustLII. Okay, there's a lot more details about Search Connector there. But I would like to focus on an example just to show you how that might work. I might as well go through a couple of these things before I switch back to the browser. When we come to search results, I've already demonstrated one of them. By default, you look at your search results, you see the most relevant, likely order of relevance. Okay, it's what we call by relevance. It's the default display option. There are a number of other options that we can use, and I'll show you in a minute. One is by citation frequency, which is basically how frequently the items have been cited in the set of search results you're looking at. Okay, it's the most cited item. By database, I've already demonstrated when we did the note up, when we were looking at the collection, how that spread across all of the AustLII collection. And another option that might be useful is by date. If you want to look at the most recent document that discussed a particular topic that you're interested in, or the earliest document that discussed the topic, you can flip the display option there. Okay? I'll switch back now to the screen share so we can see an example and get that to work. Now, we can do very briefly up here, we can search all databases. So if you just go to the AustLII database and just put some search words there, it's basically a keyword scenario, and it searches over all databases on AustLII. Okay? So as I say, if I just put in business visa, or business visa cancellation, you can see as I start typing, it gives me some suggestions potentially of what my search term might be. So you can see some of the popular searches that people type in: business visa, visa cancellation. Why not use that as an example? All right? So 3 words and 3 keywords that's put in there. All right? So one of the, because you have 10,000 documents, I'm searching over everything on AustLII. You notice here we get some New Zealand materials as well, because on AustLII we are supposedly the Australasian Legal Information Institute. So you have both Australia and New Zealand, right? So you can actually type on that, and then you can say, all right, let's go to some of the options. Out of the 10,000 documents that I see here, based on the keywords, how are they distributed? So I'll click on By Database, so then it quickly filters them out. And then now you can see how they're spread, as we've done with the NoTab. But this time there are a lot more databases that's involved here. Many, many more. You can see that. So from here, again, we can focus on individual databases. We've looked at, well, we've looked at the High Court, so we can come back to the High Court, and then we can click on Patterson. Now, when you get here, what you could do is that you can click on Show Context, which is basically, in a way, sort of show some of the highlights of where some of the terms are being done. Okay. Now, in the way that we've done this, because it's a keyword search, they might not be in a row. Right? Another way you could then use it is just use Control F as well, and then just see how they are listed in that sense. So you can see business visa was not done as a phrase. Okay. So this is why sometimes if you use this keyword search and the context doesn't show you there, you can actually look at using Control F, which is Control Find on the page. And you can see why that's the case. So that is returned, but not as a phrase. You can also look at the most frequently cited document. So I click on the second tab. Now remember, the citation frequency here, as I explained, is the most cited based on the search terms that we put in. So not surprisingly, it's another migration case, given that that's our area, and it's this time interesting, it's from the federal court. So similarly, we can have a look at that. You can also look at by date. Tells you the most recent document, 12th of November. You can flip it around and you can say the earliest document. Okay, so we have government gazettes going back to 1851. So if you seriously ever want to trace the concepts of business migration, visa and cancellation, you can do that. Now, one thing I want to highlight though, by typing in the keyword business, visa cancellation, implicitly, what we've actually done is saying we want those 3 words in the document. Okay, so basically what that means is, if we translate it into a search with connectors, we would be putting "and" between the terms. So business visa cancellation is like me typing in business and visa and cancellation. Okay? Everyone understand that? When you're typing in keyword searches, that's really what the system is interpreting on the AustLII side. Alright, so just be mindful that's what you're doing when you're typing keywords. Alright, if when you're typing keywords and you're saying, no, actually mean I'm typing in alternatives, then you would say not an and, you'll be explicitly having put in an or. Okay, so you can say business or visa or cancellation. You can mix and match. You can have ands and ors in the way you construct the search. Now, I just want to give you an example based on cancellation of business visa, but I want to do it more sophisticated, in a more sophisticated way. Okay, what I like to do is introduce the notion of a proximity operator. The way I see it is, it's really about business visa. So I like that to be more like a phrase-like structure. So I can put business visa, and then I like to say near. So near means within 50 words. Okay? If you don't know any other proximity operator, or you don't remember any other proximity operator, please remember the near operator. The near operator is a good starting point for doing these sort of proximity searches. So here, what I'm saying is I want business visa within 50 words of cancellation. Now, but in a way, when we're actually talking about searching, we need to think about how people actually constructing the words themselves. So how people actually write, because ultimately that's what we're doing. We're trying to anticipate when we're constructing search terms, what it is that they're doing in their own writings. Now, we started with cancellation. And then normally I would say, if I started with the words that's in a long form, I would say, well, what about if the business visa was cancelled? Okay, or they're cancelling the business visa. Okay, so how do I deal with that sort of scenario? Okay, so let's expand this out a little bit. So let's deal with the form cancel without cancellation. So one thing I can do is to say near cancel or cancellation. You notice now that how I now combined a Boolean or operator, in other words, the alternative form, the variation between cancel or cancellation, and business visa as a phrase. I could put that in quotation marks to indicate a search phrase, if I want to do it as a phrase. Okay, and then if I conduct the search now, the results would be very different. You notice now by doing that, the results that comes back at first glance is, I assume you can see, it's very relevant to what I'm interested in. Okay, you notice the control that we are able to introduce by just knowing a couple of those key operators. Everyone, I hope understand that. If not, put in a question and I can expand this a little bit more. I'm just mindful that we're about 10 minutes, so I just want to go through a couple more details and then I'd like to open up for questions. But just looking at that example, you can see now that the results are exactly what we want. Section 134, in fact, we looked at. And this time we look at the citation frequency of these. We can see William Tien, again, is the most popular, most frequently cited database context with which the reference is case. And if you look at here, 800 documents, many AATs, FCAs. So with one case, with a one search, one case, we have a lot of leads, basically. Now for you, it's pretty much figuring out what it is that you want to be looking at and whether you want to make it even more specific in terms of what it is that you're interested in. Now, one thing that I want to draw your attention to is that this particular case has even been cited in Hong Kong. Okay? Imagine if you're using law sites in this way, that might be helpful, is to be able to look at what international courts in other jurisdictions outside Australia may have discovered. And maybe, again, might be useful in the context with what you're doing. All right, so that's just looking at citation frequency. I've talked about by database, by date. You can sort by title. That's rarely used because that's just basically put alphabetical listing. If you were preparing a list of cases, maybe that's one function that might be helpful to you. Now, the other function that we've introduced for those that are used to the classic, that may not be aware of the new interface, we have actually introduced an option called Show Excerpt. All right, if you click on that, it actually gives you a hint at the terms that we put in and where they appear in the document. So if you want to skim through the results quickly, that would be a way that you could use to look at that. Okay, so this is what we call Show Excerpt. We've not enabled it by default because with large collection, it may take a little bit longer because it's trying to figure out for you where those terms apply and display that. So, but if you're more than welcome to click on that for your own research there. Now, one last thing I want to show you before I open up for question is the advanced search form. Okay, so you can access the advanced search form from either the front page or from anywhere you see a search box. But imagine if you were coming from the front page, you can click on that, you can click on advanced search form. Click on the little triangle and it expands out to the advanced search form. I won't spend too much time on it simply because most of the time you'll be able to use the search box within the front page or the individual database pages. But there are two reasons why you may come to this page. One is if you want to do date searching. So in other words, you might say, look, I'm not interested in every period, especially as you're aware, the documents from AustLII can date back to, 1788, back to current, right? So if you want to do the same search, but this time I want to limit it, say, in the last 3 years, right? You then have to come to this particular page because it allows you to limit the date range. So let me just put the search back here, business, visa, yep, cancel or cancellation, and say 1st of January 2015. Actually make it, sorry, I'll make it 30th of June 2018. Now, the other instance when you might want to come to the advanced search page is if you want to limit the scope at a high level, rather than at the individual databases or using the filters. You can actually select individual databases or collection of databases before you do the search. So in other words, if I'm only interested in case law, you'll not easily be able to find individual case law database and select. So you can come to this database and you say, I'm going to cancel everything and I'm only saying I'm interested in only case law databases. Alternatively, you can say I'm only interested in Commonwealth case law databases. You can select that. All right? And then you can click on the advanced search. So what the search that I did was basically all Commonwealth case law databases between 1st of January 2015 to June 2018. All right? So let's test that. So you can see here by database, just make sure it's all Commonwealth. You can see they're all Commonwealth databases by date. Latest, April 2018. Earliest, I expect it to be January 2015. Okay? So everyone see that the rationale for using the advanced search screen, so you can select day ranges and you can select collection of databases there. Now, by default, it shows you only a limited list here, but if you want to mix and match, you can click on Show All, and it gives you all the different databases that you find. Okay? So in that sense, you can mix and match to your heart's content. Now, I realize there's only 5 minutes, so I better stop there and talk about any questions that you may have. Okay. Now, as I was saying before, if I can just pick up on some of the questions that people had, you could construct your search based on bisection name. So if we can say, so section 134, I would say within 5 of the Migration Act, if you were typing it rather than using the note-up. That's another way of constructing a similar note-up search. Okay, so that would basically say 134 within 5 of the Migration Act 1958. So you could have constructed this search as opposed to using the note-up. So that I can limit this, I'll just show you just the Commonwealth case law and construct it and click the search there. Oh, I'm not doing well today with the system. It's misbehaving. Let me just go back out to the page and see that construct the same search. Maybe there's no results. I haven't anticipated. I haven't tried this out. I'll just type it in this way. Yeah. So I basically typed in the wrong search, but that basically gives me just a visa. There were no cases that based on my search in that sense. So I might have made it too tight. So if I generalize it a little bit, if I say near, that would have made it a little bit wider. And that we may have got more results with the search over the regular legislation there. So let me do that again and see if we have any luck here. Now, if I did that, and it's a section 1958, so what else can you think I can do in this context? One thing I can do is that maybe people don't refer to the year as often as I think, so I can generalize it a little bit and then just see if I get section 134 within the Migration Act further in that way. I picked a really bad example today, so that's not really helping what I'm trying to do. Compelling reasons. Okay, someone said compelling reasons. Okay, so what I can do now is say compelling reasons near Migration Act. Okay, see how close is that. Let's see how close that is. I must be accessing some system that's not. Oh, let me just pick up the right system. I think the system knows its time or something. It stopped working for me for a minute. Okay, let me just. Oh, it's a regulation. Thanks, Colin. You know I'm not a migration. Let's see if that changes anything. Oh. That's very odd. I'll just do a simple search maybe. Why don't I just say compelling? What is the compelling reasons for? For compassion? Is it compassion in circumstances? Is that one of those? Okay. There's definitely some issues with the system. That's better. Okay. I think there was some system glitch before that we were not getting the results there. So I think now we're getting some results. So what you can do is that based on that, we can start playing with the terms. So we can say compelling and compassion. You can add section, is it new 8. I'll put here. See if we can get any results there. And so you can see that we're now being able to modify these further. This 820 near compelling compassion circumstances. I can make it more and more sophisticated if we start adding some of the extra terms there. Now, I know it's now 1:30. Are there other questions beyond this search? Is there anything that people are wanting to ask me right now? Oh, okay. So you can drop just compelling reasons. Yeah, okay. You can drop the and compassionate. You want to do it that way as well. Someone, I think Alexandra has something about what is the relevant to find a random case. Oh, okay. Now, with the AAT, one of the things I would suggest when you're doing AAT searches, about presumably you want to talk about migration. So one of the techniques I would suggest you use when it comes to AAT in particular, if I go back to AAT, is to make use of the fact that they use the word migration in the title of the documents they're using. So if you look at the AAT generally, you would have a whole list of everything. You can see the many different areas. Okay. One of the search that you could use when you're searching through the AAT, if you go to the AAT database, you'll be only limited to the search here from the AAT collection. So where you browse also determine your starting point. So if you only want to search within the area of the AAT, you browse to the AAT database, and then any search that you do from there would be within the AAT collection, unless you change it here. So if you click on the little triangle, you can see this database only, which it means it's AAT. Or if you want to search over everything, you click on all databases. But if you don't, by default, you search only the AAT. Now, if we repeat the search here, okay, we can use a more complicated search, but you could look at the simpler one here. This is visa-lee cancellation. Then you're limiting your search only to AAT. Okay, is that what you mean, Alexandra? Is that what you mean about AAT within the AAT collection? Okay, I hope that answers that. So, are there any other questions at this point? Okay, now at the back of your notes, I've given contact for me if you have any other questions about the presentation. But there's also general feedback. So if you have anything, if you find some errors or something like that, please use the general feedback. And there's a user guide that I've included in the link. So please download that. A lot of what I've said will be expanded a lot more in the user guide, especially the operators. Okay, so please have a look at that. Now, I should flag, I'm very happy to answer questions about how the structure of things, but I will probably, on AustLII, people would not be responding to helping you with legal research. So don't send across a legal research problem, but if you need help in terms of how to understand some of the way of using AustLII, then more than happy to help you with that. Okay, so on that note, I hope everyone has been able to pick up some tips for those that are seasoned AustLII users, and for those that have not used AustLII before, I hope that you'll then be able to use AustLII more effectively, and let us know how you think about the AustLII website more generally. So on that note, I thank everyone for their participation. I think, Tristan, back to you.
Thanks very much, Philip. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure we've all benefited enormously from your very good instruction on using the database. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks again, Philip. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.